And joining us now with his thoughts on this much debated issue of executive pay is Richard Lipstein. He's the managing director of Gilbert Tweed International, a global executive search and consulting firm. So Richard, executives giving up their bonuses, does this really significantly help the bottom line of a company?
I would say no. I mean, they don't make enough for it to have a real impact on either earnings per share or returns on investment.
They don't make enough? Someone like Jamie Dimon does not make enough?
But there's $1 trillion of assets at JP Morgan and hundreds of millions and billions in dollars of profit. So if you gave up hundreds of thousands or several million, it would have a minuscule effect on the bottom line.
So what is your read on the Sony forgoing bonus trend? Is it more of a apology, if you will, to consumers and shareholders?
I would think so. I mean, the Japanese executives have a tendency of apologizing for the actions of their company, whether or not they were actually involved in it. To me, the executives at Sony don't have anything to apologize. I mean, they're starting to turn the company around, and while there's some major issues with the consumer electronics business, to me, this is an act of economic contrition.
But this was a self-imposed bonus cut. The board did not actually vote to have this done.
Yes, I mean, boards tend to be weaker in Japan. I think this is just an acknowledgement that the executives at Sony wanted to apologize economically for the performance and show that while there are major cuts in employment that are looming at Sony, this is a way for them to give something back to the company as they slim it down and get it ready to face the future.
And yet you say we should not be expecting U.S. CEOs to be following suit due to major cultural differences.
Yes, corporate executives very rarely give money back. The most recent one, of course, was Con Ed, who gave back just several $100,000 at Governor Cuomo's urging after they award themselves large bonuses, despite what Con Ed did and didn't do during Hurricane Sandy. But American CEOs tend to not give money back unless they're forced to.
And yet American CEOs make so much more in comparison to the average American worker than Japanese
Absolutely.
do.
I think the statistic is that the average American CEO makes 319 times as much as the average American worker. While in Japan, they make, I think, 16 times as much as the average Japanese worker.
So if you say executive compensation cuts do not really substantially affect the bottom line of companies, why do it? We've had regulators, like in the European Union, for example, saying that bank bonuses have to be capped.
Well, in industries that are heavily regulated, there's been tremendous public pressure, there's been tremendous political pressure that as companies as governments have paid the banks, whether or not they needed to be paid, you know, it's unconscionable for the executives of these banks to make such outsized bonuses and outsized compensation. So it's really public and political pressure that's driving the attention that shareholders and people are paying with you know, corporate compensation.
Do you think that subsequent to the financial crisis, shareholders have more power to rein in compensation for executives?
It comes down to the board acting. Public pressure doesn't always succeed, but clearly there's much more attention paid to CEO compensation, and corporate governance being what it is, boards need to pay more attention to exactly how their CEOs are being paid, whether cash, stock, or, you know, pay for performance, and so on and so forth.
On the other hand, you do want to attract top talent to your company.
Yes.
And by cutting compensation, you could be jeopardizing that and then in the long run, hurting the company.
I think it's pretty rare for someone not to become a CEO at a large company because of compensation. I think the biggest issue is...
But they could leave to a competitive. Compensation
Yes.
is better, thereby jeopardizing the shareholders in the long run.
That's true, and I think compensation is only part of it. And I think when you reach a CEO level, you've hopefully made enough money that, you know, it's getting to the next step in your career. And this is something that I face every day as an executive search consultant. Pay is important, but if you're managing a career appropriately, you go from one company to another, take on more responsibilities, or to run away from a bad situation.
Well, someone like JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, he had his pay slashed by nearly half to compensate for the London whale trading scandal.
Yes.
Do you think that CEOs should be apologetic like the Japanese and take a pay cut, even if it's symbolic?
A CEO is responsible for what goes on in his or her company. You know, I think at the end of the day, well, they may not know, and there are others that were in the know at JP Morgan, and the investigations are showing that. I mean, there's only so much that a CEO could know when there's several 100,000 people under them. But at the end of the day, it's their responsibility for everything that goes on in the company.
Okay. Thank you so much for that
Pleasure.
insight, Richard Lipstein.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Managing Director of Gilbert Tweed International.